Hello and welcome to the Growth Advantage podcast. My guest today is David Couch, an experienced accountant of over 30 years working across multiple industries with a particular interest in the tech sector. Hi, David. It's great to have you on the show. How are you?
Hi, Rebecca. I'm fine. Thank you for having me on.
Fantastic. I'd love to start by asking you, if it's okay, about the impact of the most recent budgets. Following the UK Spring Budget in 2025 and the Isle of Man Budget 2025 to 26, which will include changes such as the National Insurance employers rise to 15% in the UK and the top income tax rate reduction to 21% in the Isle of Man. What are the most significant tax updates affecting businesses, and how is David Couch Consulting assisting clients with compliance?
Yes, that's right. The increase to employers' national insurance has undoubtedly had a really big impact on companies in the UK. Many companies, especially smaller ones, have delayed or cancelled new hires. And we've seen this reflected in the increase in the level of unemployment over the past 12 months. In relation to the Isle of Man, the tax rates were actually increased to 22% and only reduced to 21% in this current tax year. But unlike in the UK, we haven't seen much impact of this slight increase to tax rates. But what we do is try to ensure our clients stay compliant and pay the right amount of tax and national insurance.
And with economic shifts like the post-Brexit adjustments and inflation impacting the UK and the Isle of Man, how are these influencing businesses' accounting and tax obligations, and what accountancy support do you recommend?
Yeah, well, inflation certainly hasn't helped small businesses, and that covers most of our clients. Unlike larger businesses, it's often very difficult for small firms to pass on price increases relating to their suppliers and obviously staff wages as well. This naturally has a negative impact on their profits. So what we try to do is find legitimate ways to reduce the tax burden using available reliefs. And sometimes if people are particularly having cash flow difficulties, we suggest they speak to HMRC because they're quite often happy to agree a payment plan.
Yes, of course. And other business challenges now. So based on your experiences at David Couch Consulting, what are the most common accounting and tax hurdles that UK and Isle of Man businesses face today, such as managing cash flow, reporting, VAT compliance, I guess, or handling increased national insurance contributions? And how can these be addressed through professional accountancy services?
Yeah, I mean, look, just to sum up all of those points you've made there, this is all around tax compliance. And I would say in all the years I've been doing this is probably the most complicated tax regime that we now have. And it's getting worse, especially in the UK. And we are seeing more and more instances of people making mistakes and unfortunately incurring penalties, because you get penalties even if it was a non-deliberate mistake, careless is what they call it. So it's become more important than ever, I'm afraid, to take advice from an accountant when dealing with basically anything that's more complicated than just your salary.
Of course, as you say, there's so many changes and things are getting quite complex. I mean, how can businesses in the UK and the Isle of Man prepare also for accounts for upcoming regulatory changes, like, for example, the UK's tax avoidance crackdown or the Isle of Man's global minimum tax implementation?
Yeah, it's really key. I mean, this is the one thing I say to all clients is keeping good records is essential for your business. And people tend to think of that just in terms of things like sales invoices and receipts, but it's much broader than that. It includes any contracts or agreements that you might have, whether that's with staff or suppliers, or if you've sold part of your business. Keeping all those records is really important. And the way that you can do that is by having a really good accounting system. We've seen people use things like Excel spreadsheets, but we would advise against that. It's worth investing in a good accounting system. It doesn't cost very much these days. Most systems are cloud-based, so it's very affordable. So we'd certainly recommend that. And that's really key to ensuring that you maintain tax compliance.
Absolutely. And are there any tax reliefs or allowances that businesses are perhaps overlooking? And how do you offer tax advice to help maximise those?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And it's not really a surprise that people overlook or mainly don't even realize that reliefs, are available. That's because the whole tax system, especially in the UK, but also in the Isle of Man, is not straightforward.
Such a minefield.
It is a minefield, yeah. So as part of our normal onboarding and ongoing review procedures, we spend a lot of time finding out as much as possible about clients. Sometimes they wonder why we're asking so many questions, but this is the reason we do this, is so we get a full understanding of their business. And you'd be amazed at how often that throws up areas for further review and discussion, particularly around, available reliefs. So that's all part of our ongoing procedures.
And I guess clients are then delighted when you do find them something that they didn't know that they could make use of course.
That's exactly right. Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And that's where we can really add value to the whole process.
Fantastic. So in current market conditions with high interest rates and cost pressures, how should businesses refine their accounting practices and tax strategies to ensure accurate financial reporting and compliance?
Yeah, it's a really good question again. I mean, this is really where budgeting comes into its own and can be really useful. I know it might seem a bit dull, but budgeting can really help businesses to understand, first of all, what they expect their outgoings to be over the next 12 months. So they can actually plan then. Do they need more money? Do they need to adjust their cost base? And it's also very helpful to be able to go back and compare your actual expenditure to what you had originally budgeted, because that can easily and quickly identify areas of waste or where you might be, overpaying. So that's really helpful in that regard. And the same goes for sales. If you're expecting a certain level of sales, but your actual sales are lower, then you can use this information to see what went wrong and what can be done to rectify the situation. So, and to your last point, by reviewing your actual results against the budget, this actually plays a key role in ensuring compliance, because it can also be used to identify errors at an early stage, and hopefully before you submit your next VAT return or your next corporation tax return.
And of course, to build on that, what essential accounting metrics and reports should businesses prioritise for better oversight? And why are these vital?
Yeah, I mean, for most small businesses, and we see this all the time, cash flow is the most important measure, because running out of cash can cause serious disruption to a business. And I know people tend to focus a lot about P&L, but a business really is disrupted because of a lack of profit. They're disrupted because of a lack of cash. And a P&L account is an historic record of performance, but it can still be very useful because it's useful for identifying areas for improvement in terms of sales and indeed expenditure, and perhaps where you can make savings as well. And, the balance sheet as well can be very useful, but that's just a snapshot of the financial position of a business at a particular point in time. So that has slightly more limited use.
Yes, of course. So it's a combination of all of them to give you a realistic overview of the business and how it's performing.
Yeah, it is. And, we're always happy to provide our own insights on a client's business performance, and indeed assist them with that reporting as well.
And how also can businesses optimize their tax liabilities, including things such as VAT returns and corporation tax calculations, especially under the UK's 25% rate or the Isle of Man 0% regime, while staying fully compliant with HMRC or the Isle of Man Treasury? And what value does expert accountancy bring in managing that?
Yeah. So this comes to a really key point when talking about tax. Businesses need to be really careful when using the rules to reduce their tax liabilities. Most people know that tax evasion is wrong and illegal, but some people don't realize that tax avoidance can also get you into trouble. There are rules to prevent aggressive avoidance planning, and it can be really easy to fall foul of those rules. So it's really important that before making any changes to a business, particularly if you think it's all driven by tax, that you seek professional advice. And that's certainly something, we see and we can help with, but it's always best to discuss it before you actually make any changes.
Yes, definitely, of course. And moving on to growth and planning within businesses now, when considering business expansion into the UK or the Isle of Man, what key accounting considerations, for example, budgeting for tax implications or setting up proper financial controls, should be addressed? And how has David Couch Consulting supported clients in these?
Yeah, no, so it's, again, we're seeing this, in the Isle of Man, and indeed in the UK, where businesses expand, but you need to be wary of the fact that any expansion can have an impact on tax liabilities, because particularly in regards to reliefs and allowances, many of those are only available up to a certain level of taxable profit or income. But that's not the only thing to think about. As businesses grow, they could hit other thresholds, for example, the requirement for an audit. And it's not just the audit. If they get bigger, they may have to have additional policies in place. And these, in many cases, are mandatory for larger companies. Our expertise, though, is really helping those small owner-managed businesses and entrepreneurs looking for help and support on setting up a new business, either in the Isle of Man or indeed in the UK.
Right. And what advice could you offer to businesses on how they can structure themselves for sustainable growth, including entity setup in the Isle of Man's low tax environment? What advice could you offer?
Yeah, as with most things in life, there are pros and cons of setting up a business in the Isle of Man. People tend to think mainly about the tax regime. The first thing that people tend to think about when they think about the Isle of Man. But the one thing I say to anyone looking to move to the Isle of Man, particularly to set up a business, is to make that decision for the right reasons and not just because it's a low tax jurisdiction, which it is. You need to consider the wider business environment, especially the pool of talent. People don't realize, but there's nearly a 100% employment on the Isle of Man. So one of the challenges for new businesses is finding good quality people. Quite often, just poach them from another business. They're not just waiting for you to come to the Isle of Man. So that can be very challenging for companies, and even practical things like just getting on and off the island as required. It's not a case of just jumping on a train and going into London. It needs planning and foresight. So those are things that need to be taken into account. But all of this, anything to do with setting up a company on the Isle of Man, the tax regime, all these other things ancillary to setting up a business, we're very happy to help and advise on. And if we can't, we tend to know people there.
Great. So some great food for thought there. It's really good to know that you're there to offer that advice and support to people who are considering doing just that. And in general now, what emerging trends would you say in accountancy, such as the mandatory digital reporting under Making Tax Digital or ESG integrated financial statements, are you observing in the UK and the Isle of Man? And how is David Couch Consulting adapting to improve those client services?
Yeah, well, we've already seen the start of digital reporting. In fact, digital reporting for VAT has been around for a while now, but HMRC has plans to increase that over the coming years, and eventually that will affect all areas of tax compliance. So that's just something we're going to have to get used to. And indeed, regular reporting, gone are the times when you could just report once a year. In future, you're going to have to report on a more regular basis. Particularly self-employed people are going to have to start reporting on a quarterly basis. So that's going to be challenging. That's a huge change from where we've been before. Consistent actually with how the US works too. But the important thing is things are evolving. We can expect them to continue to evolve. Of course, one of the things that having a professional firm to help you on having that firm there can help you with all those things and keep on top of all of those changes. And it's important that you do so, because we've always got the threat of penalties, fines for not meeting those requirements.
Of course, so it's really important to work with a company such as David Couch Consulting to make sure that you're covering all of those bases and sort of don't get caught out.
Yeah, exactly.
And moving on to technology now, how are you finding that technology such as cloud-based tools, for example, Xero or Sage, are revolutionising accounting processes for businesses? And what's your advice for implementing these to enhance accuracy and efficiency?
Yeah, no. So look, having having online and cloud-based services is becoming more the norm now. And accounting software plays a really key role in our ability to provide services to our clients. Yeah. Our preferred platform is Sage, but we're just as happy to work with Xero. But irrespective of that, we would say to all clients, use a good professional accounting software. In fact, in some cases, you need to in order to submit filings to HMRC, and that's only going to increase. And just avoid using things like spreadsheets or bits of paper. Yeah. It's become more important than ever to use professional accounting software. And just one final point on that is that with this accounting software like Sage and Xero, they keep on top of all the changes. So that's really helpful as well. So any sort of changes to tax laws or allowances or anything like that, that's all done for you by Sage or by Xero.
Right.
don't need to worry about that. So another good reason for using it. And these days, the cost of accounting software is relatively small. So yes, it's much more affordable than it used to be.
And for that cost, like you say, a lot of the legwork's taken out of it for you now. The old
Exactly.
systems where people did everything manually, these softwares make it so much simpler. So it's obviously,
Yeah.
a really necessary investment for any business. And moving on to recent tax developments, what new accountancy and tax advisory strategies, such as leveraging the UK's R&D tax credits or navigating the Isle of Man's Pillar 2 global minimum tax, gaining importance for businesses in 2025?
Yeah. I mean, look, things like R&D tax credits, let's sort of start with that. I mean, that's a very specialized and complicated area of tax relief, which is still available for now to innovative companies in the UK. The rules have certainly tightened on that in the last couple
Right.
of years, and the reliefs are not as generous as they used to be. And it's actually harder now to claim R&D tax credits. And that was because the government at the time thought that the system was being, abused. And this is why it's more important than ever to have expert advice, because the penalties now for making a false claim for R&D tax credits are much more, severe. But generally speaking, tax is getting more complicated, not less. So again, it just emphasizes the need for having a good tax advisor, on your team.
Yes, definitely. Looking forwards now, what accounting and tax challenges, for example, potential UK recession, impacts on financial reporting or rising compliant costs, do you foresee for the UK and Isle of Man businesses in the coming years? How can they prepare for this with professional support?
Yeah, no, I mean, look, I think we're living in quite uncertain times. For a small business, it's very difficult to foresee where the government might look to next in terms of tax increases. Certainly, all the signs are that there is going to be increased tax burden, so it's going to become much more uncertain. Need for planning is going to become much more essential now, whereas before it might be a nice to have. Now, I would advise all businesses now to plan, regardless of how small you are, to think about the next 12 months and beyond in terms of what your sales are going to be and your cost base and how it's going to be impacted by changes, not just to tax, but regulation, as well. There's bills going through Parliament at the moment, for example, in relation to, employee rights, and that's going to have an impact.
Right.
So all these things need to be taken on board. Even worse than that, the penalties for non-compliance, are only going to increase as well. And that's just another headache for small business. So what this points to is need for professional support. And from our perspective, we're having to adapt as well. We're having to change, the type of advice that we give. We're now having to help a lot more as more and more these changes filter through and impact on businesses. And it's not just the accounting and taxes, it's more broadly in terms of general compliance. So certainly a more challenging time for us and indeed our clients.
Of course, and that actually leads on nicely to my next question, which is going to be about how might future regulatory shifts like updates to UK GDPR affecting data in accounting or the Isle of Man's financial service rules influence business accountancy practices, and what proactive tax and accounting approaches does David Couch Consulting suggest?
Yeah, look, it's really hard. We don't have a crystal ball. I was asked by a client only the other day, what changes are going to come into effect in this year's budget. I just don't know. And trying to plan around that is really hard because they're trying to make some decisions around capital gains tax. And of course, they want to know, what the impact might be. But it's so hard because the only person that knows that is the Chancellor. So we always say, try not to try and plan around budgets. Try and plan around, your business. And, you mentioned UK GDPR. I mean, that's just one of many challenges. I mean, in the Isle of Man, we have an equivalent to UK GDPR, but that's just one of just many challenges. I think, though, where we're headed, and we're seeing it more and more now in all walks of life, and it's moving very, very quickly, which is going to be the biggest shift, and that is in relation to AI. And the use of AI, all walks of life. I think that's going to be the most interesting and challenging, arguably, aspects of running a business in future. Not just in terms of how you use AI within your business, but potentially the threat of AI on your business. As AI gets smarter, you have to adapt.
course.
thinking about that whole sort of development in AI, I think that's going to be the biggest challenge to companies, and thinking about how they might adapt to those changes and use them in a positive way to be successful. But I think it's going to be a challenge, for our clients and indeed for us.
Of course, definitely. Like you say, there's so many changes for all businesses, whether they're startups or existing businesses. And so that professional advice and support is always going to be critical to any business. And really appreciate all of the insights that you've shared with us today, David. And finally, if people have watched this video and would like to speak to you or find out more about your business and the services you offer, where can they find you?
Very easy. So it's an easy website address to remember. It's just davidcouch.net. So very straightforward. It's just my name and .net. And there you go. And everything you need to know, how to contact us, all about our services, it's all on there.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again for your time today, David. It's been really insightful hearing everything you've had to say.
Yeah, thank you.
And I hope that things go well for you in the future. And anybody that's interested in reaching out to you, find David on davidcouch.net. Thanks ever so much, David.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.